March the 2nd, 2025. As you're looking at an article that came out this afternoon, and it's about the United Nations chief, who is Guterres, is warning of global funding crisis due to U.S. cuts. Now, by the time we get through this video, I hope you realize, because it made me realize just how bad it had gotten once you get more details out, especially with Doge giving certain information that we would have never seen to us. But we have become, and I'm saying the taxpayers, the working class taxpayers of the United States, has been funding the world for quite a while, it looks like, because even though they're saying 20% is what we pay, all the other things that are being fed through there, the 20% is nowhere near what we pay. But what has happened is, again, the working class has become slaves to the world. Europe had this plan ever since, I think, the Boston Tea Party, was to go, England and Europe go together and put the banks into the United States like they did, politicians and all of that, rules and regulations. The bar that the lawyers use is from England. That term comes from there. But guys, what had happened, and you'll understand, I think, by the time we go through this article, that we were the slaves of the world. And not only that, we were working our tails off, paying in tremendous amount of taxes, and all of that money was going, a lot of it was going to the UN, it's other places too. But what they were doing was funding the crisis at the border. All kind of stuff, guys, that was anti-American. So we were slaving and to send the money to the United Nations so Europe could take a break, and Europe is nowhere near involved in it as they would have you think they are, just like in the Ukraine war. But we have been slaves to that system that was designed to destroy us, and it's time for that to end. But it says the Trump administration's agency audits and funding cuts have a wide spectrum of people in a panic, not just in the U.S., but around the world. For some, this is not much of a revelation. It's been known for decades that the U.S. taxpayer backstops numerous governments and NGOs, non-government organizations. Without U.S. dollars, many of these organizations and some countries would not exist. Are you listening? We were the slaves and still are, maybe starting to come out of Egypt. Maybe. But that's what's been going on, guys. And it was all, we were working to keep the IRS off our backs, and the whole time the money was being fed for the destruction of our nation. It says without U.S. dollars, again, many of the organizations in some countries would not exist. However, seeing the beggars all come out of the woodwork at the same time to get their cut of the pie because the money is running dry is truly something to behold. Why has America become the cash cow for the entire world? Guys, that's bad enough, but when the entire world is trying to destroy us, that makes it a whole different ball game. And I've said since Trump got in and they're starting to talk about Doge and all of these things, finding all the stolen money, we need it back. I don't want to hear Mike Johnson say pay back anything. Pay us back, because all of the money spent came from our backs, our blood and sweat. Pay us back. The nation will thrive because we will thrive. The economy will thrive. Pay us back, Lindsey Graham. Anyway, call it an extension of globalism or the incremental sabotage of the U.S. economy. The bottom line is that the U.S. is the wealth generator for hundreds, if not thousands, of political and financial entities that do not have the best interests of Americans in mind. U.S. taxpayers are investing in their own destruction. And guys, it wasn't just that the U.S. politicians were taking our money and turning the country against us with gun rights, everything you can think of, carbon taxes, everything you can think of, high interest rates, crazy economy. but they were giving a lot of it to other nations to do the same thing to us. It says yet another example is the United Nations, which received around $18 billion total from the U.S. annually. That's 20% of the UN's entire budget each year. U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has released a press statement calling for a reversal of funding cuts, warning that the organization cannot function without U.S. dollars. Guys, that's what exactly needs to happen. They need to quit functioning. The building needs to be taken over and turned into a museum or a big whatever, apartment complex or whatever. Anyway, it needs to be shut down. How many years have we talked about the United Nations blue helmets and them parking tanks and staff inside our nation? It needs to go. And this is a chance for that to happen. He wants to reverse the funding cuts. Well, him and Zelensky are going to have fun together getting that done. Now, Guterres is saying these cuts impact a wide range of critical programs. Told reporters at the UN headquarters in New York the consequences will be especially devastating for vulnerable people around the world. They don't care about the people around the world. They are the head grifters and the head, kind of the point of the era of destruction. The president of the UN Field Staff Union said the organization's severe liquidity and funding shortfall has created a crisis that threatens the foundation of the staff's work. It needs to be eliminated. Guterres has told the reporters at the UN headquarters in New York the consequences will be especially devastating for the vulnerable people around the world. They don't care, guys, about the people. They care about the grift and the destruction. Last week, the UN called the situation a liquidity crisis. In other words, you're broke. You need to be broke. You need to be disbanded. Let's take the building back and make something really nice out of it. And maybe we can exercise it or get somebody that knows how to do it. Sprinkle some holy water on it and some olive oil, whatever you got to do. But that thing has been the devil's hangout for quite a long time if you haven't been keeping up with it. It says it's created this crisis that threatens the foundation of the staff's work, who are the backbone of the institution. How many people are they paying to be at the U.S. border giving out credit cards? The UN does this at the Mexican border, giving out credit cards and welcome them illegal aliens in as we pay them our tax money. It says they're being forced to bear the brunt of these financial constraints. He's talking about the workers. Workloads are increasing beyond sustainable levels. Why? Because you can't pay anybody. He said urging member states, to meet their financial commitments fully and on time. Him and Z, they got that same problem, don't they, guys? The U.S. officially provides 20% of the UN's budget, but this is not the end of it all. As Guterres mentions, other governments are also coincidentally cutting funding at the same time as the U.S. In other words, these governments get money from America, then give it to the UN. It is not clear exactly how much of the UN's operations are supported by American taxpayers, but the funding cuts promise to be quite revealing. Take them out, Elon. Much worse is how the UN spends the money. Let's take a look at that. The UN then exploits that cash to fund anti-sovereignty efforts such as mass immigration programs into the West and the overthrow of nations. Guys, they contribute to the humanitarian and national security crisis at the U.S. southern border by distributing millions of dollars in financial assistance, including debit cards and cash vouchers, to fund migrants headed north. The same migrants that have been crossing into the country illegally in record numbers. Do you see now how it's not just the 20% that we're giving them, but the other nations that we give money to are putting back into their goals here and their NGOs to destroy this nation? That building needs to be, again, either occupied by and done something with, or I don't know, but it needs to be emptied of the current occupants. It says, keep in mind, the U.S. taxpayer doesn't get to choose how our money is spent by globalist organizations. And guys, if you want to go all the way to the top of the globalist organizations, you're talking about people that are possibly non-human. I'm talking about the real world leaders. And that it was designed thousands of years ago for us to become the slaves. It says, again, we don't get to choose how to spend the money. And the organizations talk endlessly of humanitarian food aid and HIV prevention and refugee support, but they don't talk about bankrolling mass migration from the third world or promoting transgender propaganda internationally, or putting millions into the anti-gun right lobbies, or Agenda 2030 and net zero carbon controls, sometimes referred to as sustainable development goals. These projects are where the money really goes. Now, when you get into the net zero carbon controls and all that, you still got a lot of grifting going on, even though it's doing its damage as well as the transgender thing. It says the majority of the ideals and goals put forward by the UN run contrary to U.S. values and freedoms. It is an insult to American citizens to steal their money, use it to pay for a project that would normally oppose. We oppose all of their projects, and then accuse them of causing a global panic when they decide to take their money back. If the U.S. government wants to support a specific humanitarian cause, they can do so directly instead of using a middleman like the UN. America is not obligated to support globalism. And it, guys, they don't mention the blue helmets here and their destruction, rape and pillage that they've done. This is a satanic organization, and it needs to be gone. This nation prayed very hard in the last few years because we saw how bad it was, or let me take that back. We thought we saw how bad it was. It's 100 times worse than what we thought it was, guys, because it wasn't just our politicians doing it to us. The entire world was. As this country that's not overrun, or it was on the verge of it, is about to come back and leave the world behind because of what they've been doing to us, and they deserve it. Get your own United Nations building over in Europe somewhere. Keep it there. Keep it in Germany. Who cares? Get that crap out of here. We don't want it anymore. Guys, here's a little bit of that video. I'll link to it if you want to watch all of it. But what you're not going to hear there is the truth. This is Gutierrez today.
Good morning. The Secretary General will read a statement. We will not be taking questions today.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I want to start by expressing my deep concern about information received in the last 48 hours by UN agencies, as well as many humanitarian and development NGOs, regarding severe cuts in funding by the United States. These cuts impact a wide range of critical programs, from life-saving humanitarian aid to support to vulnerable communities recovering from war or natural disasters, from development to fight against terrorism and illicit drug trafficking. The consequences will be especially devastating for vulnerable people around the world. In Afghanistan, more than 9 million people will miss out on health and protection services, with hundreds of mobile health teams and other services suspended. In northeast Syria, where 2.5 million people need assistance, the absence of US funding means programs are leaving large populations even more vulnerable. In Ukraine, cash-based programming, a key feature of the humanitarian response, reaching 1 million people in 2024, has been suspended in key regions. In South Sudan, Funding has run out for programs to support people who have fled the conflict in neighboring Sudan, leaving border areas dangerously overcrowded. Meanwhile, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime will be forced to stop many of its counter-narcotics programs, including the one fighting the fentanyl crisis, and dramatically reduce activities against human trafficking. And funding for many programs combating HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and cholera have stopped. We have been extremely grateful for the leading role the United States has provided over the decades. For example, thanks to the generosity of donors led by the United States, the UN assists and protects more than 100 million people every year through our humanitarian programming. From Gaza to Sudan, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and beyond. American funding directly supports people living through wars, famines, and disasters, providing essential health care, shelter, water, food, and education, and the list goes on. The message is clear. The generosity and compassion of the American people have not only saved lives, built peace, and improved the state of the world. They have contributed to the stability and prosperity that Americans depend on. United Nations staff members around the world are deeply proud of what we have accomplished together as partners. Now, going through with these cuts will make the world less healthy, less safe, and less prosperous. The reduction of America's humanitarian role and influence will run counter to American interests globally. I can only hope that these decisions can be reversed based on more careful reviews, and the same applies to other countries that have recently announced reductions in humanitarian and development aid. In the meantime, every United Nations agency stands ready to provide the necessary information and justification for its projects, and we look forward to working with the United States in this regard.